Throughout history, physical beauty has been a coveted ideal for women across cultures and eras. Yang Guifei, hailed as one of ancient China's greatest beauties, became the emperor's favorite concubine and lived a luxurious real-life fairy tale. However, her breathtaking allure ultimately led to a horrific death and contributed to the downfall of an entire dynasty. Born in ancient China in 719 AD during the Tang Dynasty, Guifei grew up very comfortably. Her father held an important role as a census official, making their family status nothing to turn your nose at. Even so, Guifei eventually ended up with far more than she probably imagined in her youth. During that time period, families arranged the marriages of their sons and daughters, most often to improve their social standing and wealth. In Guifei's case, she gave her family one huge leg up when she married the Prince of Shou at just 17 years old. That made her a princess and quite possibly the future empress, and she managed to do it all while standing out in a most unexpected way. By all accounts, Guifei boasted exceptional beauty, which is probably just another reason she got selected to marry the prince. But her beauty stood out for another reason. At the time, Chinese beauty standards leaned towards a woman having a plumper figure, and Guifei certainly lived up to this ideal. Many reports claimed that she had a curvaceous body, but all things considered, perhaps she proved too delectable a sight for her own good. Now bound in marriage to the prince, she likely expected to live out her days in luxury with the rest of his concubines until he himself became emperor. But everything changed when she caught the eye of the prince's father and ruler of the dynasty, Emperor Xuanzang. Even so, it took a little tragedy to really shake things up. Reportedly, the emperor didn't really take serious notice of Guifei until he lost his own favorite concubine and the prince's mother, Consort Wu, in 738. And while it wouldn't be the first time grief pushed someone to make questionable decisions, legend reveals one specific instance that pushed the emperor over the edge when it came to our stunning, albeit already married, beauty. One particular story states that the emperor gave Guifei permission to bathe in the hot springs at Huangqing Palace. The legend doesn't quite explain how they got to that point, since the palace typically reserved that spot for only the emperor and the highest ranking members of the family. But perhaps the emperor had a little crush, considering the fact that he stuck around to watch. As the story goes, the emperor managed to get a full view of his son's lovely wife rising from the hot springs when she finished her bath. And according to that version of events, he just couldn't get over her astounding radiance despite the nearly 4 decades he had on her age. At that point, he just couldn't help himself. The emperor couldn't just take Guifei from his son. Or he could, but it wouldn't look great on the family or dynasty. So instead of just snatching her up, he made her a Taoist nun. Probably not what you were expecting. But as it turns out, the emperor planned to play a very methodical long game. With Guifei relieved from her wifely duties, the emperor took the opportunity to bestow a new wife on his son. And with that, the emperor proceeded to make Guifei his concubine. But he didn't just add her to the thousands he already had. He made it abundantly clear that she was more than just the favorite. Many reports indicate that the emperor didn't just desire Guifei physically, but that he actually fell in love with her. According to ancient lore, they spent many evenings together. Guifei danced for the emperor, and supposedly the two went so far as to pledge their infinite love to each other. But of course, the emperor also put his money where his mouth was. Guifei especially loved to snack on the sweet, juicy lychee. Unfortunately for her, the fruit typically only grew in southern China, far from the palace where the emperor lived with Guifei and his court. Even more, sending for the fruit would typically take quite some time, affecting the quality of the snack. So what did the emperor do? Whatever he had to keep his girl happy. In a habit that eventually started to arouse people's displeasure, the emperor used his royal couriers to fetch the fruit for Guifei as often as possible. One version of the story said the emperor went so far as to have the trees that grew the fruit transported to the palace and planted there. And even so, all those physical gifts still didn't prove enough for his Guifei. In the end, the intangible things he gave her proved the most valuable of all. The emperor bestowed as high a status on Guifei as he possibly could. In fact, her very title, Guifei, made her the highest of all the concubines the emperor had. In essence, Guifei became the highest ranking woman at court, and all the officials treated her accordingly. But the course of love never did run smooth, and even when it came to their whirlwind passion, things between Guifei and the Emperor eventually hit some extremely rough patches. Even with the court very clear on her status, it seemed some women still hoped to take Guifei's spot as the Emperor's favorite concubine. According to some reports, things came to a head in one instance when Guifei accidentally walked in on the Emperor having relations with another concubine. Furious, she went into a rage on her royal lover. And if you haven't already guessed it by now, that was definitely the wrong move. Whether for that infraction or another, history confirms that the emperor did in fact send Guifei away for her impertinence, effectively returning her to her family in 746. But once she left and her absence settled in, the emperor's temperament changed drastically. He became ill-tempered, impatient, and impossible to console. Luckily for everyone at court, one of his officials realized that the emperor likely just missed his favorite woman. The official approached the emperor with the idea of bringing Guifei back, but the emperor had more complicated methods of winning her back. Rather than just sending his officials to bring Guifei back, he also sent several gifts to her, including a trove of royal food. That very evening, he did indeed bring her back to the palace and reportedly doted on her even more. But Guifei couldn't quite hold her tongue, and when she flared up again, she seemed to take the emperor's response a bit more personally. A few years after the first infraction, Guifei got disrespectful with the emperor again, and he once again sent her back to her family. As he did before, he regretted it shortly after and sent gifts to regain her favor. This time, though, Guifei seemed to realize how seriously she messed things up, and to show how sorry she was, she sacrificed something major. When Guifei received the gifts, she sent a very apologetic note back to her royal lover. She realized he and the court could easily take her life for her disrespect, and felt she didn't deserve to go back to him. And to top her apology off, she sent back some of her crowning beauty, her hair. Take one guess on how the emperor responded to that show of humility. The emperor ordered his officials to bring Guifei back to him as soon as possible, and of course she returned to him with as much affection as before, if not more so. Their relationship continued to thrive, but seemingly unbeknownst to the emperor, it started to get in the way of other much more important things when it came to his actual job as the ruler of China. The emperor and Guifei spent copious amounts of time together, so much so that he began to neglect his duties. He often left them to his other officials. If they remained loyal to him at all times, that wouldn't be an issue, but as he eventually discovered, that wasn't the case. Even worse, literally everyone knew his Achilles heel. It all started in 747 when a Turkic general, Anlu Shan, appeared at court to meet the royal family. Guifei seemed to take to him right away, so much so that she legally adopted him into her family. She cared for him so much that she considered him a son, although the true nature of their relationship really depends on what version of the story you believe. According to some reports, Guifei engaged in an illicit romantic affair with Lu Shan, unbeknownst to her aging royal lover. This is certainly possible, though most historians seem to consider it an unfounded rumor. Either way, they shared a bond that made the emperor look very favorably on the Turkic foreigner. But when he started to set his sights a little farther than he was actually entitled to, everything went awry. Reportedly, Lu Shan eventually began competing for status with Guifei's cousin, Yang Guisheng. Thanks to the emperor's favor, Guisheng held a very high position at court, something Lu Shan began to feel he himself deserved. And when Guisheng got wind of that, he responded with everything but humility. Guizhong knew very well that he outranked Lu Shan. He probably also considered himself untouchable, considering his cousin's close romantic relationship with the emperor. So he essentially started picking on Lu Shan, finding reasons to take out officials from the man's own mansion. But when Lu Shan couldn't take it anymore, chaos erupted. In 755, Lu Shan finally reached the end of his rope. He rebelled against Guizhong and ultimately the emperor, rounding up his men to storm the palace. Guizhong managed to get another general to meet Lu Shan in combat, hoping he could protect the palace. That general failed spectacularly, though, and with Lu Shan on his heels, the emperor, Guifei, and their court found themselves left with no other choice but to flee. Once on the run, the situation quickly moved from bad to the absolute worst. While hunkering down at Ma Wei Courier Station, the palace guards started to ruffle with dissent. Likely both ragged from the run and angry at the circumstances, they searched for someone to blame for their situation. They didn't have too far to look, though. They easily landed on Yang Guizhong, declared him a traitor, and dealt him the most severe punishment. The guards ended Guizhong's life for what they insisted was a high act of betrayal against the emperor and the Tang Dynasty. They didn't stop there, though. They also took his son, wife, and all Guifei's sisters down with them. That essentially left them with only one final perceived traitor in their midst, the emperor's favorite girl in the world. The guards totally encircled the place where the emperor was staying with Guifei and several other high-ranking members of his court, threatening more bloodshed. The emperor himself tried to go out and calm them down, but they ignored him. Only one tragic solution seemed like it could suffice. The emperor entreated his officials for a solution. In response, they recommended he end Guifei's life in solidarity with the guards. Of course, the emperor refused, but as time wore on, he lost his resolve and ultimately gave Guifei up to save himself. All things considered, though, he at least tried to give her the most dignified ending possible. Rather than giving her to the angry guards, the emperor made his officials take her to a Buddhist temple. There, they provided her with a silk cord to end her own life, which the country traditionally saw as the most noble way to go. Her burial, unfortunately, didn't turn out to be quite as honorable as the emperor probably hoped. The officials buried Guifei there near the street. They didn't make a coffin for her, but they did wrap her in fine cloth and bury her with her fragrances. And so the guards relented, returning to their support for the emperor. Eventually, they defeated Lu Shan and returned to the palace, where the emperor seemed to finally come to terms with the incredibly high price Guifei paid for his safety. Once he safely returned to the capital, the emperor sent his men to find Guifei's body and give her a proper burial, a mission done in secret. They found her body quite decomposed, but managed to properly bury her, bringing the emperor the fragrances buried with her as a memorial. The emperor fell apart, reportedly sobbing over the memento, and judging by his next act, perhaps he never really let it go. The emperor commissioned a portrait created in Guifei's honor. He placed it in a special place in one of his palaces, and reportedly went to see it very often. But even that didn't turn out to be enough to quell the emperor's grief. As the legend goes, the emperor beseeched a priest to try to contact Guifei in the spiritual realms. That sounds like the highest level of grief, with a nice dose of remorse over his actions thrown in. the priest managed to come back with a message from the emperor's beloved, and seemingly gave the emperor some relief, and probably just in time considering the tragic fate that loomed just ahead. According to several historians, the dynasty never truly recovered from the Lushan rebellion, leaving it vulnerable to other conflicts as well as natural disasters. In just 8 years, the Tang dynasty had begun to spiral and would eventually fall in 907 AD, losing power completely. Intriguingly enough, some people still found a way to blame it all on Guifei, and not just for distracting the emperor or bringing her family into court. Some of the locals took their accusations of Guifei even further, insisting a foreign country somehow sent her to China with the very intention of tearing down the dynasty. All facts considered, that seems entirely untrue, but it does show how angry the people felt. And yet, even with all the haters she left behind, the mark she left on history proved impossible to eradicate. An art piece depicting Guifei appeared in a Chinese calendar in 1915. It doesn't sound like much until you realize the picture imagined her emerging from the emperor's Huaqing hot springs, and she wasn't exactly covered up. It caused a stir and is still very traditionally conservative China. Regardless, Guifei turned out to be a woman history will never forget. Guifei remains an icon of Chinese history, hailed for her great beauty and remembered for her effect on the emperor. Many sculptures of her remain in the country, including one sculpture recreating her stepping out of the now infamous hot springs. But Guifei's legacy went far past her country of origin. Even today, centuries after she walked the earth, Guifei continues to appear as a character of interest in popular culture. Her story has inspired art in several genres, including film, television, and even operas. Which is to say, perhaps things didn't end all too well for her personally, but in the long run, her beauty led her to make an indelible mark on the world. Thanks for watching History Expose. If you love uncovering the best stories in history, hit like and subscribe to keep exploring with us. Don't forget to visit our main page Factinate for more incredible facts about everything.